Today is the fourth day regarding the discussion on neural control and coordination, that is chapter 18 of NCERT biology. We will discuss about central neural system, which is also known as central nervous system. The central nervous system, or we can say central neural system, comprises brain and spinal cord. Today I will discuss about brain. I will not discuss about spinal cord because in the chapter 18, that is neural control and coordination, there is nothing mentioned about spinal cord. So you don't require to learn about spinal cord in this chapter. The brain is well protected by the skull, whereas the spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column. Let us discuss about brain. Brain is the central information processing organ of our body. It acts as the command and control system. Brain controls the voluntary movements, function of vital involuntary organs like lungs, heart, kidneys, etc. Brain controls thermoregulation, hunger and thirst. Brain also controls circadian rhythm of our body. Brain controls activities of several endocrine glands and human behavior. Brain is the site for processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotions and thoughts. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by cranial meninges, which is made up of 3 layers. The outer layer is called dura mater. The middle layer is very thin and is called arachnoid. And the inner layer is called pia mater, which is in contact with the brain tissue. The brain can be divided into 3 major parts, that is forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Forebrain comprises of cerebrum and the components of diencephalon. The various components of diencephalon are a pair of thalami, a hypothalamus, epithalamus which contains pineal gland and habenular nuclei, and subthalamus which contains subthalamic nucleus. In NCERT, you will learn about thalami, a pair of thalami and hypothalamus. There is nothing mentioned about epithalamus or subthalamus. But you should know that the various components of diencephalon are a pair of thalami, a hypothalamus, epithalamus which contains pineal gland and habenular nuclei, and subthalamus which contains subthalamic nucleus. Let us first discuss about cerebrum. Cerebrum forms the major part of the human brain. A deep cleft or fissure divides the cerebrum longitudinally into 2 halves. These are termed as left and right cerebral hemisphere. This is left cerebral hemisphere, this is right cerebral hemisphere. The fissure that divides the 2 cerebral hemispheres longitudinally is called longitudinal cerebral fissure. This longitudinal cerebral fissure is also known as interhemispheric fissure. So longitudinal cerebral fissure and interhemispheric fissure are same. The left cerebral hemisphere and the right cerebral hemispheres are connected deep within the longitudinal cerebral fissure by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. A tract of nerve fibers represent a bundle of axons within the central nervous system. There is a layer of cells that covers the cerebral hemisphere. This layer of cells is called cerebral cortex. This cerebral cortex is a thin, highly folded layer of grey matter. Grey matter represents a region of central nervous system that controls the cell bodies of neurons and appears greyish in color. The grey matter is primarily responsible for processing and integrating information. Cerebral cortex is responsible for consciousness, intelligence, memory, learning, language, emotions and voluntary movements of skeletal muscles. Cerebral cortex is composed of 6 distinct layers of neurons and is highly folded. This folding increases the surface area to accommodate billions of neurons. The functional areas of cerebral cortex includes motor cortex, which controls the voluntary movements, sensory cortex, which receives and interprets sensory impulses, and association cortex, which is a large area that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. This region is involved in memory, learning, intelligence, reasoning and language. In the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere, the axons are covered with myelin sheath, giving an opaque white appearance to the layer, and hence it is referred as white matter. However, certain collections of neuronal cell bodies are present within this white matter. These are called embedded grey matter and include basal ganglia, which is involved in the control and coordination of voluntary movements, and other deep nuclei such as amygdala, which play a role in emotions. The inner part of the cerebral hemisphere also contains corpus callosum, regarding which I have already discussed earlier. As mentioned earlier, the four major components of diencephalon are a pair of thalami. In singular it is thalamus, right thalamus and left thalamus, and in plural it is called thalami, a pair of thalami, that is one right thalamus and one left thalamus. A hypothalamus, epithalamus and subthalamus. These lies deep within the brain, almost completely covered by these two cerebral hemispheres. These components of diencephalon surrounds the third ventricle. As we have already learned that one of the major component of diencephalon is thalamus, or we can say a pair of thalami. These thalami are the major coordinating centers for sensory and motor signaling. They are located in the center of diencephalon, one on each side of the third ventricle, forming a right thalamus and a left thalamus. And these pair of thalami look like oval-shaped masses. Now, hypothalamus, which is another important part of diencephalon, is located below and inferior to thalami. It forms the floor and lower side walls of the third ventricle. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which control body temperature and urge for eating and drinking. It also has several groups of neurosecretory cells called nuclei that secrete hormones called the hypothalamic hormones, which are directed to the pituitary gland, as pituitary is connected to hypothalamus by a stalk called infundibulum or pituitary stalk. We will discuss regarding this in the chapter when we will discuss about the various endocrine glands. In the chapter where we will deal with the endocrine glands, we will discuss that how hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary by a stalk called infundibulum, and what passes through infundibulum, how hypothalamus is connected to the anterior part of the pituitary, and how hypothalamus is connected to the posterior part of the pituitary. We will discuss in that chapter. Now, epithalamus is located above and behind the thalami. As mentioned earlier, epithalamus contains pineal gland and havenular nuclei. Now, subthalamus. Subthalamus is located below the thalami and lateral to the hypothalamus. Below the thalami and lateral to the hypothalamus. Subthalamus lies above the midbrain. As mentioned earlier, subthalamus contains subthalamic nucleus, which is involved in motor control. The diencephalon as a whole remains deeply embedded beneath the two cerebral hemispheres. Therefore, from outside only cerebrum is visible and diencephalon is not visible. Now I will discuss a little bit on limbic system. The limbic system is a group of interconnected brain structures located on the inner side of the cerebral hemispheres surrounding the thalami and lying above the brainstem. Limbic system is often called the emotional brain because it plays a central role in emotions, memory, motivation and behavior. The major components of limbic system are hippocampus, amygdala, hypothalamus, cingulate gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus and fornix. So these are the 6 major components of limbic system. Again I am repeating: hippocampus, amygdala, hypothalamus, cingulate gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus and fornix. Hippocampus is essential for learning and formation of new memories. It converts short-term memory into long-term memory, whereas amygdala processes emotions, especially fear, anger and aggression. Hypothalamus controls autonomic nervous system and endocrine functions. It also regulates body temperature, hunger, thirst, sleep and emotions. Cingulate gyrus is involved in emotional processing, attention, learning and emotion, whereas parahippocampal gyrus assist in memory encoding and retrieval. Phoenix is a bundle of nerve fibers that connects the hippocampus with the hypothalamus and other limbic structures. In your level, you need not to go in details of this limbic system. You just remember the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of associate deep structures like hippocampus, amygdala, etc. form a complex structure called the limbic lobe or limbic system. The limbic system regulates emotions like fear, pleasure, anger, sadness or excitement. The limbic system forms and stores memory. The limbic system controls motivation and rewards. The limbic system influences learning. The limbic system plays a role in sexual behavior and maternal behavior. And finally, limbic system regulates autonomic responses through the hypothalamus. Now I will discuss about midbrain. We have already discussed about forebrain, which comprises cerebrum and the components of diencephalon. Now I will discuss about midbrain. Midbrain is also called mesencephalon. Midbrain forms the uppermost part of the brainstem. Midbrain is situated between diencephalon on the top and pons in the below. Midbrain acts as a communication bridge between the forebrain and the hindbrain. Midbrain plays an essential role in vision, hearing, eye movements, motor control, posture and consciousness. A canal called cerebral aqueduct passes through this midbrain, and this canal connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. The dorsal surface, that is the posterior surface of midbrain, has 4 rounded elevations, 2 on the top and 2 on below. The 2 on the top are called 2 superior colliculi, which are the visual reflex centers, and the 2 below, which are called inferior colliculi, these are the auditory reflex centers. Superior means on the top and inferior means in the below. In singular, we call it as colliculus. In plural, we call it as colliculi. So there are 2 superior colliculi, which are the visual reflex centers, and there are 2 inferior colliculi, which are the auditory reflex centers. These superior colliculi and inferior colliculi are collectively called corpora quadrigemina. Finally, I will discuss about hindbrain. Hindbrain comprises the pons, cerebellum and medulla. Medulla is also called medulla oblongata. Pons is located between the midbrain on the top and medulla oblongata in below, and pons lies anterior to the cerebellum. Pons consist of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. The pons give rise to 4 cranial nerves. They are cranial nerve 5, which is also known as trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve 6, which is also known as abducens nerve, cranial nerve 7, which is also known as facial nerve, and cranial nerve 8, which is also known as vestibulocochlear nerve. Now we will discuss about the function of pons. Pons transmit motor information from cerebral cortex to the cerebellum. Pons relays sensory and motor signals between the brain and spinal cord. Pons work with medulla to regulate breathing through pneumotaxic center and apneustic center. Pons helps regulate the sleep-wake cycle. Pons control facial functions like facial expressions, chewing, etc. Pons processes auditory and vestibular information through the vestibulocochlear nerve, thus concerned with hearing and balance. Now we will discuss about cerebellum. Cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain. It is located behind the pons and medulla oblongata. Cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. You will be surprised to know that although cerebellum accounts for about 10% of the brain's volume, but it contains more than 50% of the neurons in the central nervous system. The fourth ventricle separates cerebellum from pons and medulla. The cerebellum also contains 2 cerebellar hemispheres, right cerebellar hemisphere and left cerebellar hemisphere. We have already learned about cerebral hemisphere in cerebrum, right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere. Similarly, cerebellum also contains two cerebellar hemispheres, that is right cerebellar hemisphere and left cerebellar hemisphere. These cerebellar hemispheres are connected in the middle by a narrow structure called vermis. The outer grey matter of the cerebellum forms a highly folded cortex called cerebellar cortex. The cerebellar cortex has three layers. The outer side, it has molecular layer. In the middle, it has Purkinje cell layer. And on the inner side, it has granular layer. The inner side of the cerebellum has white matter, which resembles a characteristic tree-like appearance. So it is called arbor vitae, that is tree of life. There are four paired nuclei embedded within the white matter. Cerebellum is designated as little brain. Cerebellum is connected to the brainstem by three pairs of cerebellar peduncles. They are superior cerebellar peduncle which connects midbrain, middle cerebellar peduncle which connects pons, and inferior cerebellar peduncle which connects medulla oblongata. So, the three pairs of cerebellar peduncles are superior cerebellar peduncle which connects the midbrain, middle cerebellar peduncle which connects the pons, and inferior cerebellar peduncle which connects medulla oblongata. Now, what do we mean by peduncle? Peduncles are thick bundle of nerve fibers forming the white matter which connects one part of the brain to another. So, three cerebellar peduncles are superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now, as per functions are concerned, cerebellum helps to maintain balance and posture. Cerebellum regulates muscle tone and also coordinate voluntary eye movement. Cerebellum coordinates the muscles involved in speech, contributing to clear articulation. Cerebellum helps to improve skilled movement like writing, playing musical instrument, cycling, etc. Now the last part which is left is medulla oblongata. The medulla is connected to the spinal cord. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. Now we should know that the three major regions which make up the brainstem are midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is also known as medulla. Brainstem forms the connection between brain and spinal cord. Medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem. Brainstem is situated below the pons and above the spinal cord. This medulla continues as spinal cord at the foramen magnum, which is the large opening at the base of the skull. Medulla is cone-shaped, wider above and narrower below. There are four pairs of cranial nerves that emerges from medulla. These pair of cranial nerves are cranial nerve 9, which is also known as glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve 10, which is also known as vagus nerve, cranial nerve 11, which is also known as accessory nerve, and cranial nerve 12, which is also known as hypoglossal nerve. It is to be noted that in case of accessory nerves, the cranial root emerges from the medulla, but the spinal root arises from the upper cervical spinal cord. Now, glossopharyngeal nerves are related to taste, swallowing, and salivation. Vagus nerves, which are the 10th cranial nerve, are related to functions of heart, lungs, digestive organ, and also voice. Accessory nerves supply neck and shoulder muscles and control their movement. And hypoglossal nerves control tongue movements. Thus, we can brief the functions of medulla like medulla regulates heart rate, force of heart contractions, diameter of blood vessels, and blood pressure. Medulla works with pons to regulate rate of breathing, depth of breathing, and rhythm of respiration. Medulla controls several important reflexes like swallowing, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and hiccuping. Finally, medulla helps to regulate digestion, salivation and intestinal movement. Thus, damage to medulla can cause cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, difficulty swallowing, which is called dysphagia, and speech difficulties. So, this is all about the brain part of the central nervous system. I haven't discussed anything about the spinal cord because in your syllabus, spinal cord is not included in the NCERT for appearing to NEET undergraduate.